Welcome everybody to the session, Cyber Ready Industrial Manufacturing, What is the Risk? And if I were to look over the last 6 years since we've been doing this event, when we likely only had one of the sessions focused on OT security, now half of the agenda is focused on operations technology, cybersecurity. We are super thankful to the speakers, Richard, Travis, Bradford, and Dan for sharing their insights and welcome the moderator, Richard Springer. But before we do that, I want to thank Fortinet for sponsoring this session. Welcome, Richard.
All right, Lucian, thank you so much, and welcome everybody. It's an honor here to be your host with our distinguished panel. Again, my name is Richard Springer, and I'm the Director of Marketing for OT Solutions for Fortinet. And with that, just a couple notes of housekeeping. So we will be interactive. So if you have any questions during the panel or near the end when we have our Q&A, please use the Q&A button at the bottom. The chat will be reserved for other administrative items if necessary. So again, please use the Q&A button. And this session is being recorded as well. But as far as our agenda today, we are going to be talking about cyber readiness, looking at our preparation, the response, and then the protection of production. And that culminates in our risk aspect of it as well. And so with me again, a distinguished panel, and then I will turn it to each of them to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about them and their company, and then we'll get into the questions. So with that, I will move on my cyber right to Dan, and then to Brad and to Travis. So Dan, go ahead. Oop, Dan, you're on mute right now.
I sure am. Thank you very much, Richard. My name is Dan Schaefer. I'm a senior partner manager with Dragos. Dragos is a leader in the OT cybersecurity space. And I really appreciate both the time of all the panelists, but also all of the viewers out there for taking time out of their busy day to hear a little bit more about cybersecurity risk.
All right, Brad, go ahead.
Hello, everyone. My name is Brad Hegrat. I'm a principal director in Accenture's operational technology and cyber physical security practice. I've been with Accenture for just over 5 years now, with 25 years in the industry, primarily focused on what I'll refer to as non-standard cybersecurity. So happy to be here with everyone today, and thanks for listening in today.
All right, Travis, go ahead.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Travis Titwell, and I serve as a commercial strategy lead for Rockwell Cybersecurity Services. And for those who may not be familiar with Rockwell, we are a global leader in industrial automation, digital transformation, and also in industrial cyber solutions. So we operate within about over 100 countries with over 28,000 employees, and a lot of our products are in a lot of the industrial sector industry. So certainly, our objectives and missions align with the focus today, which is protecting what the world relies on.
All right, very good. All right, well, Travis, since you just finished, I'll start with you. As far as cyber readiness is concerned, we are talking about the balance of preparedness and with risk, but what is at risk in manufacturing operations today?
Yeah, there's certainly a lot at risk, right? And financial losses is one of the obvious ones. And as a manufacturer, you must be able to put the risk into the proper context, right, beyond just the financial loss. So when you think about what are those elements that enables your organization to deliver on their key missions, right? Every organization has some type of mission statement, right? So you're looking at what does that mean as far as product quality, what does that mean as far as product safety, product efficacy, as well as the viability of that supply. So whether you're product services or some types of goods to the consumer market, those are some of the things that are at risk. So we need to really kind of understand the risks to the organization's missions and how those risk factors can impact the achievement of those business objectives. So that's kind of where we're looking at when we talk to our customers around how has risk been defined and categorized within your organization to align on strategies for risk mitigation.
Okay. All right. Very good. So Brad, maybe expanding upon that, some other factors associated with the risk. I mean, we talked about production and so forth, but do you have some added comments in regards to the risk equation?
Sure. When you talk about risk means different things to different people. So understanding the context in which risk is being discussed is germane to the conversation. Additionally, from our standpoint, our clients really are looking at not only just uptime, but the ability to serve their customers' needs. So from our standpoint, when we look at risk to manufacturing today, it's the ability to satisfy your downstream customers as well as your ecosystem partners. As technology progresses and as our ecosystems expand, we find ourselves in a position where we're not only an island among ourselves, but we're part of a bigger, more expansive and broader ecosystem. So understanding the risk that you have for yourself, as well as the risk to your ecosystem and your partners, I think is very, very important and relevant to the conversation.
Okay, great. Thanks, Brad. So Dan, turn it over to you as well. I mean, we've identified a lot of these different factors. Any others that come to mind when thinking, again, this risk algorithm is several factors long off the side of the page. What are some other items?
Yeah, well, Travis mentioned some of the things that are quantifiable in terms of downtime and lost revenue, but there's also some more difficult nebulous things to quantify. So things like reputation. A mishandled cybersecurity event, especially if the market perceives it that way, can have a negative impact on a company and how it's viewed in the market. Same with intellectual property, right? It's often hard to quantify the value of intellectual property, but when you think about a cyber event compromising that or allowing some proprietary information to get exfiltrated from you, that can have some serious negative consequences. Just think of the hundreds of millions of dollars tied to something like a Big Mac secret sauce or Coca-Cola's recipe.
Sure. Yeah, no doubt. High stakes for sure. So thank you, gentlemen, for going over the risk piece of it. Again, every company is unique. The risk equation, again, has different factors for different scenarios. So we've covered off on the risk piece of it. We're going to take a quick poll for us and actually for the rest of you out there to see who's in the audience and where you're coming from as far as the cybersecurity and risk evaluation and so forth. So with that, we've got our first poll here, and we're just going to identify where you're coming from, whether you're coming from an IT team that's looking into the OT space, or you're an OT team in the OT space, or you're a hybrid team that you've had leadership decisions or managerial decisions to blend the two teams together, or you're not any one of those, or maybe you're a consultant or other. So if you can, go ahead and click on where you are coming from. That'll give us a sense in this webinar and kind of where we are as a timestamp, really from industry on whole. I've seen these questions elsewhere in other webinars, and it's always insightful and oftentimes surprising that we see the influence of IT becoming more and more prevalent in the industrial space. So we'll just give it a couple minutes here, and so here we have some results, and so we have looks pretty flat across the board, and actually the blended IT OT is a couple percentage points above the rest of them, but pretty flat. So we kind of have everybody at the table, if you will, and the none of the above, maybe even somebody could comment in the Q&A or so forth of what that none of the above is, but possibly this is on the compliance side. Maybe it's from the risk office. Certainly there are other folks involved with how we're producing and producing safely and lowering risk. So very good. Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. Okay, so let's go back to our questions. So the one side of the scales here of production justice is the risk piece of it, and now we're going to shift over to the cyber readiness piece. So, I mean, what is cyber readiness, and is cyber readiness ever something that's obtained? And if I'm asking that question to you, the audience, maybe you're cyber nervous instead of ready. So Dan, why don't you kick us off with talking about some of the factors associated with cyber readiness?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, it's a tricky statement to define. Part of it is a technology stack, or your capabilities with some of your tools out there. Some of it is your processes and your planning. So you might have an incident response plan. Maybe you've invested heavily in training, so your people are part of your readiness. But one of the things that's important to remember about any type of readiness, however you define it, is that it's not a static state. I think of it as sort of akin to trying to climb a down escalator. So if you're just standing on a down escalator, you're losing readiness, right? The people that you trained, you're losing to attrition or to retirement. The tools that you're using that you've invested in, they start to get obsolete. They may start to lose some efficacy as adversaries get better. Even the processes can get out of date if you're not testing them and validating that they're still useful. So that's one thing about readiness. And then the other thing is it's important to recognize sort of the right side of that equation. The other side of the equal sign is readiness yields to resiliency, operational resiliency, where you're actually able to defend and recover, maybe is a good way of putting it, from any type of event.
Okay. So you brought up the resilience piece of it. So now we've got the cyber readiness and then resiliency or resilience embedded in there as well. Brad, maybe you take an opportunity to kind of expand upon the resilience piece of it as an expansion of readiness or
Sure.
separate.
From our standpoint, when we talk about cyber readiness, we're really, to Dan's point, we're really talking about that cyber readiness component. And for us, resiliency is an outcome of the idea of being able to detect and protect your systems, as well as the ability to respond and recover from a digital event, whatever that event might be. So the concept there is that you can never be fully, or can you ever be fully digital ready or cyber ready? That's the first question. And the second component is with that cyber readiness, can you be able to respond without being able to protect and detect? So it's the culmination of a number of different processes, people, technology, all coming to bear at the same instance in time for the purpose of maintaining that uptime, that resiliency style of operating.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh yeah, sorry, Travis. I was just going to say, I mean, having talked about readiness, I mean, there's certainly tactical things in there, resiliency again, but they almost sound philosophical. So Travis, maybe I'll turn to you for maybe some real world use cases down on the floor about how this is being played out from a readiness and resiliency standpoint.
Yeah, so exactly. So to expand on what Brad and Dan was, discussing as far as that state of operational resiliency, right? So we look at, as you mentioned, the outcomes, right, which are focused on being able to have an effective and reliable response strategy to overcome that adversity, right? So when you think about, to achieve those outcomes, what is happening during those events, right, is that your organization must be pretty strong and capable of looking at what we say different things when it comes to, all right, your operational continuity plans, right, which focus on your ability to maintain operations under a certain state of conditions. So in those different events, right, a use case can be, what occurs during an event do we need to run in an isolated state? Do our site personnel know how to coordinate with the global security team who they may not have access to? Do they have access to the critical backups, right, as it relates to those different control systems, as well as being able to test those before they are called into play, right? So, we look at how that then kind of translates to that communication strategy as far as who's authorized to make the critical decisions, how do we escalate that in terms of being able to triage what are responsibilities. So those are some of the things that play out in the use case. So when you have an event, what is that response strategy? Is it effective? Is it reliable in order to maintain continuity throughout that state?
Okay. All right, Travis, thank you very much. So we're going to take another poll very quick again, as you saw in the first one. This is going to be more about where kind of what group you are associated with as far as solution providers or ownership as well. So again, getting a better feel for where we are as an industry and who's really taking in this wise advice. And so our second poll here is, how would you characterize the organization type that you're a part of? And if we can have that come up. I think we're going to have that come up. Lucienne or Paul, can we have that survey come up? Well, you know what? Oh, there we go. Got
There
it.
we go.
Excellent.
Yeah, I see it.
Easy problem. That's what we blame it on. Yeah, so go ahead and if you can click off quickly about the organization type that you're part of, whether you're a system integrator, an asset owner, possibly a product vendor, consultant, or other. Again, with kind of quickly evolving space, both with the readiness and appreciation of the risk that we've seen over the last couple of years. Certainly a lot of people involved in this aspect, whether you're on one side or the other, providing solutions, or you're an owner yourself. So we'll let that play out for a second.
It's definitely important to call out, Jim. I think that everybody on that list still has some role to play in cyber readiness. There's nobody who's absolved from that responsibility. Oh, I'm just a consultant. Well, yeah, you have a role to play. I'm the asset owner. I'm paying somebody to tell me what to do. You still have responsibility. You can't abdicate that just because of a role that you think doesn't apply to you.
All right, let's take a look at the results here. So I have quite a few consultants in the audience, and then looks like a pretty even spread across the SIs and asset owners and vendors, and then the others as well. So, all right, very good. Thank you again for your participation, and then we'll continue to roll on here. So Brad, from your standpoint with Accenture, let's get into about, again, more drilling down into the advice piece of it about how they need to work on to improve their cyber readiness. I mean, that's such a large challenge, but just give us some of your advice coming from Accenture in your role.
Sure. So from our standpoint, there's a number of different factors to take into consideration when you're really talking about cyber readiness and how to increase your cyber readiness. It's not all technology. And it's not all culture or people. With regards to the first poll outcome, I find it's very interesting that we're finding more and more converged teams. I've said for, I don't know, probably close to 10 years now that when we talk about IT and OT convergence, the technology convergence is largely over with. It's done. There really isn't an IT style of technology that isn't used in the OT space. The technology, like I said, is done converging. What we're left with, what remains, is the cultural convergence, and that's what we're starting to see, especially even in this poll here, that the cultural convergence is ongoing. We had more respondents coming from a blended team rather than an individual team. It just makes good business sense. So when I bring this up in the context of this conversation, because many times some of our clients are not in one or the other, they're in a blended style of state. So taking that into consideration really starts to drive some of the decision-making that you would want to have as part of your journey for being cyber ready. Additionally, that's a people first style of response. And I recognize that. While Accenture is largely known as a systems integrator and one of the world's largest systems integrator for technology, many times we like to start, especially in the OT security space, we like to start with the people problem. Reason being was we may elect to make different risk-based choices based on the people and the behaviors of those individuals within the space. So understanding the full scope, depth, and breadth of the problem space is very key to making your selection moving forward to enhance cyber readiness. That said, a lot of our clients come to us with a concept of, oh, I need to be more mature, and I need to be more capable in understanding where I sit benchmarked against my industry peers. And while that is somewhat effective in certain verticals and certain industries, it's not always the case in every vertical or industry. So the other component that we find is that efficacy and maturity don't always line up one-to-one. So I guess what I'll ask my co-panelists here is, do you see a difference between maturity and efficacy? I know where my opinion is, but I think I'd like to hear from my colleagues on that particular point.
Sure. Dan, do you want to take a swing at that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the maturity piece to me is largely strategic, right? It's when you are at a certain level of maturity, I think you're acting strategically, you're making longer term decisions, you're not beholden to changes in economic conditions or budget cycles. Because if you're not, you're going to immediately have that backsliding, right? You're going to lose that maturity very quickly. I think there are times when you can have a high level of efficacy without a super high level of maturity, but you're definitely rolling the dice that the incident that happens or the attack or the adversary or whatever happens to fall into an area that you're good at. Because without the maturity, it feels like you're just going to have a lot of tactics. And sometimes, you're good at a particular tactic, and that's what you need to combat a certain incident. But without the maturity, it's just a piece of luck more so than anything really strategic.
Travis, you got some thoughts on that as well?
Yeah, I agree with my counterparts here. And certainly, right, there's a link between the two, right, in terms of maturity and resiliency, but I certainly would not consider them equal, right? Because you can have, a great program that could look not appear effective based upon the people in place, right? Or you can have a bad program that appears effective because of the people, right? So from a maturity perspective, right, that provides a broad outlook on progression, maybe compliance across your cybersecurity program. And that's very important, right? Evaluating your practices, capabilities, and processes, whether ad hoc or repeatable. And then when you contrast that to, what does that mean to be, effective, looking at resiliency, being able to provide more specific and reliable outcomes to really drive effective risk management and preparedness when it comes to what happens before, during, and after event. So what we typically see, right, is that we're looking at two different frameworks, right? So you may look at this cybersecurity framework as it relates to measuring progress, right? And that provides a great roadmap on those key functions that we're all familiar with: identify, protect, respond. And then you may need to leverage something more of a global standard, like a IEC 62443, for more specific evaluations and implementation guidance to ensure that you have that state of resiliency, integrity, and reliability within your ICS environment, to make sure that you're able to deal with that, right? Because the consequences in OT are pretty different, right? When you think about that from that perspective.
Yeah, good point. Yeah.
I asked the question largely because of the people comment, and when we come back to this, what we find, what I've seen in my experience is the fact that organizations with high performant, very highly developed teams can operate very effectively. However, they may not write everything down. So on a 30 scale, right, they might not be very mature,
Exactly.
but they're very high performant. So it comes back to the culture piece. And a lot of it, to me, as we start to interject and intersect the IT and OT domains together, right, with that further convergence of the cultures, I think that high performant teams will remain probably more effective, but that's not a strategy for the long haul, to Dan's point, right? So I think. To me, it's interesting to see that a lot of our clients are saying, I need to be more mature. And many times when we double click into that statement, we find that they're looking to be more effective in what they're doing with their teams.
Can I ask just a quick follow-up on that? Because I loved your point. Do you think there is a correlation or even a causation between the risk appetite of certain folks, like as that cultural convergence happens, and IT and OT start working together? Do you think that drives an appetite differently for risk than in non-converged teams?
So from my standpoint, what I said in the beginning was risk means different things to different people.
Yeah.
So as you converge these two teams together, you're going to get different perspectives. Sometimes that's a really good thing in terms of understanding the totality of risk. Other times, especially if you're bogged down in the technology, you can find yourself making different decisions based on the technology and not necessarily the risk. I think the more diverse teams that you have, the better understanding of the battle space, if you will have, and then that will allow you to make better, faster, more informed decisions across the board. Whether or not it affects the appetite, that's an internal culture conversation to the organization. I've seen some organizations who are very mature yet not very effective be more risk averse. And then on the flip side, I've seen the teams that are very effective, but maybe don't write everything down or may not have tracked metrics and continuous improvement processes in place. They might be a little bit more, able to accept more risk or willing to accept more risk. So I hate to give the consultant the answer of it depends, but it depends.
And Brad, I wanted to piggyback on that comment you made around the people aspect, especially when it comes to having diversity in teams. And that is very, very imperative, important, right? As we've seen that we have a very, pretty diverse mix of OT, IT, and others in this audience. So when you look at, there's these teams coming together. The beauty of that is you bring in different perspectives. So the alignment comes into play with, yes, let's understand each other's priorities. Let's align those to unify on the outcome that we're looking to achieve to drive that effectiveness. And when you get that diverse thought, this is where you have, innovation. This is where you have productivity gains, because now you really kind of understand what are those differences and requirements, right? That needs to get blended together for that converged culture, right? In terms of what are some of the services that may be required, what are some of the performance characteristics in OT environment, what are those specific requirements that drives our priorities, and then you contrast it with some of the other priorities to make sure that you're getting the best of both worlds to move forward from a people and culture perspective. From
an operational standpoint, impact and criticality will do a lot of the driving of the decision making that you'll have to undertake.
Oh yes.
I mean, that is what's critical to OT folks might not be critical to IT folks, but as you converge the team, you get that common understanding. And that doesn't mean that they're both critical to everybody in the team, but understanding the nuances between the different domains and how you choose to act in the different domains will drive a lot of your decision making going forward.
Yeah, and I would just add in here too. I mean, I think looking on the reverse side of this, I mean, the OT space is filled with servers and then unique OT devices, right? So IT professionals who are used to protecting and securing, maintaining OS-based servers in that DMZ and below are skilled professionals in that space, and so they have risk awareness that maybe in the industrial space, engineers in that space don't. Right. So there's something that can be learned and shared there as well. And then it's that cross-pollination of risk from the different skill sets that is probably going to benefit the combined team or the strategy over long haul. And I'll just share that where I see this playing out is asking, as we're working tactically on the project and so forth, is kind of what's over the horizon as far as like a security operations center, a network operations center for your OT. Is this something that is going to evolve on itself and stand alone? Because it is so unique and the risk needs to be handled by the risk operators, or is this something that's going to merge into the IT SOC? And then what are shared benefits of resources, budgeting, again, IT knowledge and skill, and then how do you explain and mitigate risk from an OT perspective in that merged IT OT SOC? So that's a interesting, just from shared experience, interesting strategic question that's a little bit over the horizon. So Dan, I see you're kind of nodding your head there as well. Some shared experiences there.
I definitely believe that the IT SOC will take a larger and larger role in coordinating OT cybersecurity and sort of being an umbrella. Even though we're seeing a lot of the IT-OT convergence, a lot of the truly deep technical understandings of cybersecurity is still pretty much in the IT domain. And those practitioners, that's not something that's going to be quite as easy for the OT side to spin up. And as technology tools get better and better at integrating OT specific insights, whether it's asset visibility, detection, vulnerability management, into existing IT tools, it just makes sense. It's an economies of scale, and it's just leveraging existing investments that are already in the IT SOC to just sort of take that over under their umbrella, in my opinion.
Yeah, as part of that, though, when you take the OT assets and you want to onboard them to an IT-based SOC, there's a heck of a lot of context that has to come with it. Otherwise, you're just looking at IPs, you're looking at indicators of compromise and the like, and looking at doing all the things that we do in a SOC. And that all makes sense and well and good, but if we don't understand the impact and criticality of the operational domains and the assets under review or control of the SOC, we miss out on a lot. Not all IP addresses are created equal. And if we look at Rockwell controllers, for example, you can have two identically spec'd Rockwell controllers with the same IO cards, with the same processors and the same comms cards, babysitting two separate sides of the industrial process. One could be something that's fairly trivial, and the other could be something super criticality. The way they digitally present themselves to the environment is exactly the same. So we have to have the ability to take the context of what the industrial process is and then elevate that to the purview of the SOC itself. Without that, you're destined to spin your wheels. And sometimes you might even fail.
Right.
We just,
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so we just need to tag assets with either a $1 sign or the $4 signs in order to
I wish it was that easy.
Yeah, no kidding. Sorry, Travis, a little kind of side comedy bar there. Go ahead.
No problem. So expanding upon that, right? And so whether that SOC resides on the OT side or on the IT side, that will be a decision for that organization to make. But I will just make some comments around to Brad's point, right? What must be elevated is certainly the context. So as a requirement to that, I would say wherever that SOC resides, you need to make sure that that security operations center is infused with hybrid expertise, right? So you want to have a blended set of resources in there who are very knowledgeable. Because when you look at the technology in terms of, yes, certainly it's an enabler, it provides you visibility, it helps you get that telemetry that you're looking for. But when you look at the processes, right, that allows organizations to recognize the value of that technology, right? So when you think about, understand that plant environment, understanding what does that mean, this is where I'll give a shout out to my process and automation engineers, because they must be part of the solution. They cannot be put to the side, right? They are part of the site adoption perspective. And that's where we see a lot of organizations struggle, certainly after they made a huge investment in the technology stack, and they really haven't been able to be intentional about the process part, right? So that's very imperative in order to get that level of success for that adoption rate to be successful, regardless of where that SOC is implemented.
Travis, you're 100% right. This goes back to Dan's earlier comment.
Mhm.
Everyone has a voice. Everyone has a responsibility in the cybersecurity space. We should never let anyone tell us otherwise. Everyone has some level of capability and some value to add. And often overlooked in the OT cybersecurity space are those very engineers that you spoke of, Travis. So thank you for that. Because that and Dan as well. I mean, those points are spot on.
Is it fair to say that the technology stack, which is really what the heart of my point was the technology exists in the SOC already to handle OT assets? Is it fair to say that the technology is great, but it's the people then that really make the difference, the expertise, the knowledge, and the context that they can provide to help move that cyber readiness along?
Yeah, I think, I mean, you touched upon another aspect, and again, this is another concern as while we're spreading the solutions and working on the convergence piece of it is a people problem. I mean, not having enough of these people or the accessibility of the people to run these unique solutions, because there are a combination of IT and OT solutions. And so that consolidation piece, another like a strategic aspect to consider as we talked about this convergence piece, is that There simply aren't enough people to have 10 monitors per person to try to run all these security solutions. And so that consolidation piece of it too is also something that needs to be considered because the people problem is so pronounced as well. So anyway, I'd like to move on just a little bit here. Maybe some quick commentary on measurement of this. Again, cyber readiness is a little bit of quicksilver. I think again, Brad, you said it. It's a journey, not a destination. But can we talk about measurement real quickly, or give us some tangible ways to evaluate our cyber readiness? Brad, why don't you start us off?
Sure. So there are a number of different frameworks and capabilities out there. I wouldn't say that one is better than the other. There are many tools in the toolbox, and understanding which tool to use at which time is probably key. And that differs by industry, that differs by industrial asset types, that differs by culture. There are, like I said, there's a number of options. So when I engage with my clients, it's never, hey, we're going with NIST, right? It's never that we're going C2M2 or whatever. It doesn't matter, right? It's never, we never do the same thing, just out of the way of doing the same thing. So it's a blend of decisions that that makes the most sense from an outcomes perspective for the client. What is the client trying to achieve?
Yeah, so it's basically a mosaic of best practices, and it's not one yardstick. It's many 1 foot rulers, maybe, depending on your piece of it. Travis, you had mentioned 6443. You mentioned NIST. Any others that come to mind as far as what you've seen as well, as far as using a framework to help measure?
Yeah, I agree with Brad. And there's no one framework that we use, right? So we're seeing, and I think the industry is pivoting that way as well, to adopt a blended approach, because they each provide a different perspective, and then in the different angles that you look at something, you may recognize a risk that you didn't get exposure to, and that's what the executives want to get to see, right? They want to understand, what is my full risk profile? Do I really understand the impact to my business so I can make more better informed decisions, right? So when we're looking at the outcomes, as Brad mentioned, right, that's what we're focused on with our customers, in order to look at what makes the most sense to the business to deliver on those key objectives, right? So that may result in after we get through a framework of a blended approach, doing some risk assessments, business impact analysis, what's that level that you're trying to target, and then what are some of the things we need to track? So whether that be different categories around incidents and preparedness, being able to manage and monitor our response time. It can also be looking at security governance. Do I have a strong security models in place in order to be effective, right? So have I had the site sign off on that plan as it relates to different cybersecurity requirements? And then ongoing things around like cyber hygiene, right? What are some of the things that we need to do to maintain that cyber hygiene? So I really don't get too bogged down in the framework. I mean, we leverage those frameworks, right? But we really want to focus on what are those outcomes. And one of the things that Brad mentioned that triggered a thought was, maturity has an expiration date. So you must stay vigilant. You must constantly do these things, right? Regularly. So it's an ongoing thing. So, that's kind of our blended approach. And we definitely look at focus on outcomes and what are the key things that we need to monitor that provides the business value.
Okay. Dan, anything to add into that?
Yeah, just a couple quick things. First of all, I love the vigilance piece, because I think that's so key. You just can't rest on your laurels. And then just to call out that frameworks are incredibly valuable, because they give you a framework. It gives you boxes to check and something quantitative to measure yourself against. But just a reminder that compliance does not always necessarily security. Right. So regardless of what you're measuring against, whether it's NIST or 62443 or NERC-CIP, you can have holes and have some level of insecurity, even if all of your boxes are a yes and you get a good score. So just a reminder on that.
And that's why your teams are so important. The more individuals you have talking about this with diverse backgrounds, the better off you're going to be.
Absolutely. More eyeballs, the better.
Yep, no doubt. And it's funny, Dan, you brought up NERC-CIP. I wasn't going to say it earlier, but again, it's regulatory, law, cyber regulatory law in the electrical utility sector, been around for 20 years. And I've talked to some of the plank owners of those regulations, and they'll kind of rub their brows a little bit about, well, it's turned into this compliance animal as opposed to a security animal. So there's no one best. Hats off again for the industry that took the lead on that for 20 years ago. But yeah, there's definitely some blind spots in any one of these frameworks that you need to be aware of. Good. All right. So I'd like to move on. So tips and tricks and best advice here to our audience members. I'll start with you, Brad, and then move to Travis and then to Dan. But if you could just share some advice, and after we get done with that, we'll go into the QA. So Brad, why don't you kick us off?
Sure. To drive overall effectiveness and of your cybersecurity controls in the manufacturing space, first and foremost, we have to look at the concept of macro risk versus micro risk, and the idea that you can block a lot of bad actors and some of the digital creepy crawlies, as I refer to them, by having a solid foundation in your perimeter. That would be first and foremost. Secondarily, as you get closer to control, right? As you go down the ISA 95 levels, notice that I didn't say Purdue. 95 levels. As we get down to the lower levels, you get closer to control, and that's where your micro risks take over, and you have to account for those. So segmentation is key. Aligning your network infrastructure and your security stack to the industrial control system itself, to the process under control, is super critical. It's hard to do. I understand that. It's manual micro segmentation in some cases, but the idea that you right size your VLANs and right size your IP infrastructure against that industrial process allows you to do things like effectively deploy solutions such as Dragos. It effectively allows you to have the ability to roll up contextualized information into a SOC. That allows you to do those more advanced things. If your networks are largely big and flat and open, every tool that you put on it has to sift through mountains and mountains of data to try to find those nuggets of knowledge or data that are really important to the cybersecurity operations. So right-lining things reduces a number of challenges in our network infrastructure and allows us to be overall more effective in the cybersecurity space. Which the more effective you are earlier in your maturity, the greater you will get more maturity in a shorter period of time.
Yeah. Thanks, Brad. So Travis, advice for our audience.
So, as we kind of discussed throughout the day, right? So a big part of, where our advise clients or customers, to that extent, is certainly knowing where to start can be challenged. So I always encourage them to either do some type of preparedness assessment or business impact analysis to start being able to translate that risk into business risk, right? So when you think about the value agenda that your organization have, find a way to get on that in your evaluation, right? So when you think about, from our perspective, there's a CISO playbook that we use. It's a model titled Dreamer, right? So we're looking at one, being able to discover where you're at, in terms of you can't protect what you can't see, right? So then when you think about the remediation part, being able to prioritize and eliminate those systems or upgrade different unsupported OT applications, infrastructures, you want to link that to key initiatives such as whether it be digital transformation or sustainability programs, right? Those programs will not be sustainable with inadequate infrastructure, right? So you want to secure that infrastructure, and you can link that to those business initiatives, versus doing security for the sake of doing security. You can definitely recognize a extra benefit as you go to get your business case approved by leadership. And then with the isolate part, as part of that dreamer, looking at, focusing on establishing core protection controls, which Brad just kind of mentioned, so I won't go into those. But then that allows you to put that foundation where you can start to monitor and respond and have a strong incident response strategy. So I'll close out with find a way to get yourself on that value add agenda, knowing what risk is associated with that value add agenda, and then putting a plan in place to mitigate that.
All right, Dan, over to you.
Thanks. Well, just some final ideas about risk, and just a reminder to everyone that you're not trapped into just a couple of options. You have multiple options in what you do with risk. So, the first one is always you can put a control around that risk to mitigate it, to minimize it. That usually involves an investment, often in technology. So something like a firewall, or even something like a training program to help tamp down the risk around it. You can modify your behavior. So if there's a business demand or a business ask for third-party access for some vendor support, like a packaging machine or palletizing equipment, and you're not comfortable with the risk that third-party access provides, you can deny it. You can say, no, we're going to modify our behavior and we're not going to accept that risk. We're not going to allow third parties in, with the understanding that that modification of behavior means you have to spend, you have to wait a couple of days for support for somebody to roll trucks. Third thing is you can always transfer risk, and that's often thought of as like buying insurance. So if you're worried about the financial impact, like Travis started out, I think at the very beginning, talking about downtime and revenue loss, you can buy insurance so that is all mitigated. And then the fourth thing is you can always accept the risk, right? You can always say, you know what, we've had a thoughtful discussion with other business leaders and we've weighed out the pros and cons, and we think that the risk is small enough and the consequences of that risk are insignificant enough that we're just going to accept it. And we're not going to spend money on technology, money on training. We're not going to change our behavior. We're just going to live with it. The only thing you can't do is put your head in the sand, right? You can't just pretend that the risk isn't there. So if you choose to make that fourth option of accepting the risk, my only caution is make sure you're revisiting that frequently, right? Just because you're ready to accept the risk today in May, something may have changed in December. So just, this is a journey, not a destination. I think a couple of people have said already.
Yeah, that's right. And I thanks, Dan. And my favorite story, or just, actually not story, but the real world example here is around patching. Coming from an OT space, and you talk to IT folks, like there is no patch Tuesday in industrial. It's patch maybe or patch never, right? And Brad gave the example of two identical PLCs, and then what is the risk associated with them? What is the severity of these vulnerabilities? What's the line that's running these? What's the production value of this PLC versus another one? And then still knowing that we're not going to stop that line to patch these devices, like what, we've identified them, we've taken the first step of asset inventory, but then what do we do? And we mentioned segmentation, micro-segmentation, virtual patching, even deception. These are some other different type of security tools that can be put around a valuable device as these kind of concentric rings of defense that buys us time for patching. And that's, that again, it may, be a eyebrow raiser to IT folks, meaning you don't patch. But production wise, the risk is high enough, or Dan, to your point, it's low enough that we're not. So, that's again just a real world example of how intricate this can get. But again, both perspectives and how that can lay out. So, well, good. Thank you so much. And so we've got some time here left in the session, and I wanted to turn to Q&A. And again, for those of you that may be thinking about a question, go ahead and pop it into the QA section here. I'm gonna go through these fairly quickly. First question was around metrics, indicators, and reports. Now we talked a lot about the different frameworks and so forth, but any KPIs or anything that stands out from your shared experiences that this is a metric that helps, that we can measure? Anything?
I wouldn't say that there's one that stands out. It really depends on the assets that are in play that will really drive some of those KPIs themselves. So Again, I know that's a non-answer. It's not helpful. It's
Yeah.
the it depends answer, but that's the one I have
Yeah.
for at this point. Without the context of a live running system, I couldn't point to a number of KPIs that would be meaningful.
Okay.
Right. So just in general guidance with that, right? You know, because and it has to be unique to their environment, right? Because metrics are a reflection of really kind of understanding what's important, really kind of understanding your ecosystem, as Brad mentioned, really kind of understand what assets matters to the response strategy that you want to have when it comes to operational resiliency, right?
Yeah.
So so metrics for one location may be different from a different location, right? So you got to have a framework that allows you to really evaluate what's important, what are those critical assets, what is the requirements to have like some type of survivability rate, and then you kind of start looking at where my risk tolerance is at. Am I trending downwards or am I trending upwards, right? What are the things I'm going to intentionally to drive that? And that can come from different things. It can come from people, it can come from technology, it can come from, hygiene reporting. So the metrics will be tailored based upon the outcomes that mean something to your business.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, I guess, again, being a little mathematically inclined, I mean, everything has a risk equation in that algorithm. Indicators are one of those factors, and one device or one process stacked to another one could have many more factors associated with that. So there is no one answer. I mean, of course, you can look at vulnerabilities and CVS scores and so forth. But that, again, is just one piece of that risk algorithm. So anyway, build the algorithms, I guess is the answer there.
If I could just one last thought on that. I think you both sort of danced around it, but do a crown jewel analysis. Know what's super important to you, because you may have the same risk level for a printer and a PLC, and obviously those likely have a much different impact, from a consequences standpoint. So know what a really bad day looks like. Know what you can't live without, and start your metrics around how is that measured? How is that looking from a security standpoint?
Exactly.
Great point.
Definitely.
I like that. Doing a risk analysis around those critical crown jewel assets. Absolutely.
Well, the other thing that we really want to focus on is how threat actors behave in the OT space. Many times the most effective threat actors in space tend to ditch their traditional tools and try to go native, live off the land, whatever your saying is these days. But by doing that, they're largely evading your traditional tripwires that you've set out for the environment, right? So you may not see them as easily. So what that really translates to is that if something starts to go wrong from a digital perspective or a cyber perspective within the environment, the industrial process itself may be the very first indicator that something is amiss. So watch the process, trust the people that know the process and are intimate with the process. And when something goes wrong, they'll be your, their first line of defense.
Yes.
Good. Some other, sorry, Travis, I wanted to get to some of these questions and they're coming from different directions. So I might just skip ahead a little bit. A question about how much support do you need from C-level executives to employ these strategies?
Well, what?
Who doesn't like money?
Yeah.
Right. That's what it comes down to. This is the idea. Funding is a key component here in understanding whether or not you're operating cybersecurity as a project, which has a defined start and end date, or if you're operating cybersecurity as a program. Programs live on in perpetuity typically, and typically they have annualized funding rounds, if you will, that support those programs. So get in the mindset that you're never going to be done. This is a program, not a project. And at that point, you're going to want an executive sponsor. If the executive sponsor or if your C-suite is not getting to the point of understanding the risks, we have to get them to the floor. And I've done this more times than I can count, where I've been engaged by the executives of an organization, and then they say that, Brad, I don't agree with what your view of the risk is. And then we go have a conversation. We walk the floor. We show them the devices. We show them the protections or lack thereof. And then everything starts to become more self-evident. So there's a lot of education that could be done in the C-suite around the native tactical risks inherent with those systems. And ultimately, we do this for funding.
Right, and to expand on that, right, and that goes to that statement around understanding, because you got to have the C-suite on board, right? So goes to understand the business value agenda, right? So when I think about things like, okay, creating that business case, because you got to have sponsorship. This is not a one and done thing, as my panelists mentioned. It's an ongoing investment, right? So as you creating that case, you want to also be able to try to tie in terms of, by adding these new, say, initiatives, for example, I use digital transformation, right? The more connection points that we have, obviously we know that the broader attack surfaces, right? So let's talk about what does that means in terms of the risk scenarios that we now expose ourselves to, and what that can mean as far as impact. So how do we get there? This can come through, different types of, evaluations, whether you may do like, penetration testing to understand what are some of the attack scenarios that we're susceptible to based on, threat intelligence from the community of, here are some of those key indicators that Brad kind of mentioned. What does this have from a business impact? Do we understand the processes that could be impacted from this? So when you kind of put that into the right context, your executive team has a better picture of how that has an impact on their strategic objectives, and can start allocating funds to invest in this. This is going to be a multi-year ongoing thing, right? So definitely want to create the business case by hitching your wagon to that value agenda.
So I would just say, well, I really want their money and I want their signature on a PO. Almost, I actually want their mind share, right? I want them to be invested in cybersecurity on the OT side as something they live and breathe, something they talk about at their weekly stand-up calls with the rest of the exec team, something that they put their own KPIs on, something that gets tracked and discussed. And the C-suite, they have the needle that sort of weaves this into the corporate culture. So when you start talking about cybersecurity, when they start talking about cybersecurity and really buying into it at all levels of the organization, they're the ones that can make sure everybody understands their role and embraces their role in cyber. So the money's great, the money's necessary, but yeah, you want them to be a true believer.
Yeah, and I think that we talk a lot about, and we're running out of time here, and please rate the session with that poll that's come up, and we'll wrap up here shortly. But I think the other thing you touched upon, Dan, is that a lot of these responsibilities are given the CIO or the CISO. I think the COO is obviously a worthy persona in this whole thing, because at the end of the day, this is production risk and cyber risk represented by the other folks. So it's so if you can unleash 3 budgets, the better to you. But think of that COO as more coming to the table in those cyber discussions as well. So with that, we are at the end of the hour here. Again, everybody in the audience, please rating this session. It would be great. And I can't thank you, gentlemen, enough. I've learned a lot today. It's been very insightful. I want to thank IoT World of having us as well. And I look forward to talking to all of you in the future. And please reach out to us and continue this conversation. So with that, thank you so much. Have a great day and be safe. Thank you so much.